There is a kind of stubborn that doesn't look like stubbornness at all. It looks like a woman on her knees in dry ground, pulling wire through a broken fence post before the sun has cleared the ridge. It looks like a light on in the barn at 4 in the morning. It looks like someone who has made a private agreement with herself and intends to honor it regardless of who is watching. Lena Pruitt had been honoring that agreement for 14 months. The Pruitt land sat at the eastern edge of Harlan County, Colorado territory, where the high plains ran flat and hard into the first fold of the Sangre de Cristos, 380 acres of grass and alkali flats, and one reliable creek that ran cold from snowmelt through June, then slowed to a narrow thread by August. Her father had homesteaded it in 1861, built the house himself, raised 4 children in it, and died in the spring of 1876 when a wagon tongue failed on a downhill grade. He left Lena the deed, the house, a mule named August, and a cattle operation that had been running on hope and good weather for longer than anyone had admitted out loud. She was 27 years old, and she did not waste time grieving what she couldn't afford to grieve. The land needed her. She showed up. By October of 1877, the herd was down to 19 head. The north well had gone alkaline, and the back pasture gate hung on one hinge. She had sold 11 cattle in the spring to cover back taxes. She had fixed the roof herself in August, working from dawn to dark, with split shingles she'd cut from a downed cottonwood. She had written no letters asking for help and received no letters offering any. What she had was the land, her name on the deed, the creek still running, 19 cattle that knew her voice, and August, who had outlived every reasonable expectation and seemed determined to outlive several more. She was repairing a section of the east fence when she heard the horse. She didn't stop working. Strangers rode through Harlan County with enough regularity that stopping for every horse meant nothing got finished. She kept her hands on the wire stretcher and listened with the part of her that was always listening, that trained quiet in the back of the mind that women alone on open land develop whether they choose to or not. The horse stopped. She stood then, because a horse that stops is different from one that passes. The man on it was perhaps 50, with the kind of weathered face that comes from decades working outside rather than from hardship alone. His coat was good quality but not new. His horse was a dark bay with excellent conformation and no silver on the tack. Not a show animal, a working horse. She filed that away before she said anything. "You're on the Pruitt land," she said. Not a challenge. A statement delivered the same way she would have stated the price of cattle wire. The man nodded once. Eli Garnett. He named himself the way people do when they know what a name is worth in a given county, rancher. North of here, past the Benson Fork. She knew the name. Most people in the Eastern Territory did. Eli Garnett ran the largest cattle operation between the Arkansas River and the New Mexico line. 14,000 head, they said, though Lena had always assumed a number that round was more legend than arithmetic. "Lena Pruitt," she said, and returned to the fence wire. He didn't ride on. That was the thing she noticed. Most men, when a woman returns to her work without invitation, take the hint. Eli Garnett sat his horse and looked at the fence line with the focused attention of someone reading a map. "That section's been failing since the spring heave," he said finally. "You've got 2 posts that won't hold past the first hard cattle push." She already knew. She had been solving the problem in order, which meant she had not yet reached those posts. She said nothing. He dismounted without being asked. Tied his horse to a standing post with a knot that meant he'd done this 1,000 times. He walked the fence line east, and she watched him walk it, and she did not ask him to leave because the way he walked it told her he understood what he was looking at. He came back and said, 6 posts. 3 days with a good crew. He paused. "Water from this creek flows north?" "Northeast," she said, "toward your land." He nodded, and something in his expression settled, the look of a man who has confirmed something he already suspected. "That creek feeds Garnett Range for 11 miles, he said. "I've been watching the flow since the drought years. It's been dropping. She knew that too. Anyone with eyes and a year of observation knew it. "What's on this parcel that's pulling it?" he asked. "Nothing. The aquifer's just lower. It's not pulling, it's draining. Same as everywhere." He looked at her for a moment with the particular attention of someone who has been given accurate information and is deciding what to do with it. She went back to the wire. He left without saying more, and Lena filed the visit under things that happened and went back to her list of problems in their order of urgency. He came back 4 days later. He came in the late morning when the light was hard and flat and the temperature had dropped enough to see your breath. He brought a rider with him, a lean older man introduced as his ranch foreman, DeWitt, and he carried a folded paper in his coat that he had not unfolded yet. "I want to talk about the creek," Eli said, "and the East Range." She poured coffee. She had 2 cups, and she used both. "If you're going to talk business, you sit at the table." They sat. He laid it out without preamble. A water access agreement, 3-year term, covering 1,100 feet of creek frontage and the right to move cattle across her East Range twice monthly. In exchange, fence repairs, materials, and labor, her north well assessed and, if salvageable, restored. Fair market payment for the water access, quarterly. She read the paper he handed her. She read it twice. Then she looked at the paragraph he had crossed out in ink before he brought it, where a previous draft had included a right of first offer clause on the land itself. "You crossed something out," she said. He met her eyes. "It wasn't the right clause for this situation." "Why not? Because I'm not here to buy the parcel." She looked at him steadily. "Men like you are always here to buy the parcel." Eli Garnett was quiet for a moment. "Then your creek water keeps 14,000 head alive. If I lose access to this water in a drought year, I lose cattle. If I lose cattle, I lose range. The whole operation runs on water more than it runs on grass. What I need is a reliable partner on this water, not a deed." She turned the paper over and read the back, which was blank. That was the thing about a contract with nothing on the back. It meant what it said and nothing more. She had seen enough of the other kind to know the difference. She went to the window and looked at the East Range. 19's cattle, 1 mule, 380 acres of grass that was perfectly good grass, and a creek that ran cold and clear and had been doing so since before either of them was born. "Termination clause," she said. "If your cattle damage the creek bank, the agreement ends in 30 days, and the payment structure stays in place for the remainder of the quarter. Non-negotiable." He pulled a pencil from his coat and wrote it in the margin without hesitation. "That's fair, and I want it in front of the county land recorder. Not just notarized." He nodded. "Cedar Creek has a recorder's office. We can ride there Friday." She turned from the window and looked at the paper again, and then at Eli Garnett, who sat at her table and drank her coffee and had crossed out the clause that would have given him leverage over her land before he even walked in her door. She signed it. The fence crew arrived Monday. 4 men, a loaded wagon, 2 weeks of materials. Lena was outside before they cleared the gate. She pulled work gloves from her back pocket and looked at the foreman, a barrel-chested man named DeWitt, who had the quiet economy of movement that comes from doing physical work for 30 years without drama or complaint. "Where do you want me?" she said. He pointed to the east section. "Start there. Ground softer." They worked through the morning and into the afternoon. The October cold was the useful kind, kept the sweat from making you slow, didn't get in the way of the work. By midday, Lena had set 14 posts and learned that DeWitt had opinions about post-depth wire tension and the particular inadequacy of anyone who used a staple gun instead of hammer and nail on a working fence. She filed those opinions alongside her own and found they matched in most places. The north well took 2 days. The crew foreman from the well outfit rode out from Cedar Creek and spent an afternoon with a hand pump and a water jar and announced the problem was mineral buildup in the lower casing, not aquifer loss. Lena had suspected this but lacked the equipment to confirm it. By Thursday afternoon, the water ran clear. She stood at the well and ran her hand under the flow and did not say anything for a long moment. DeWitt, passing with a fence post on his shoulder, said simply, "Good well, soil's right for it." She knew that. Her father had known it when he drilled it. Some things just needed someone with the right equipment to confirm what you already understood. She went back to work. The day before the crew finished, a rider came up the South Trail on a horse that was too showy for working country, a copper roan with silver-chased bridle work that had no business anywhere near a fence repair site. The man who rode it dismounted without waiting for an invitation and walked the property line with the careful attention of someone who was not admiring the view. He introduced himself as Warren Hale, Land and Resource Acquisition, out of Pueblo. He said he'd heard the water access agreement had been signed and wanted to discuss whether she might consider an additional arrangement. She waited. 600 acres of contiguous range north of the Benson Fork are available for consolidation, he said, with this parcel as the anchor. The numbers are strong. This parcel isn't part of any consolidation, she said. Hale smiled the way men smile when they think the conversation is just beginning. Everything has its number, Miss Pruitt. She looked at him with the particular patience of someone who has heard this exact sentence before and found it equally unpersuasive every time. This parcel has my name on it. That's the number. He let the silence work, the way such men always do. Then he said, "The water agreement you signed puts your land in a complicated position. Partners change. Priorities shift. If Garnett decides this land complicates his operation rather than supports it, you might find yourself without the fence crew or the well service and with a lease that runs for 2 more years." She didn't answer immediately. She was listening to the shape of what he'd said rather than the words themselves. Not a threat with specifics, a threat with implication. The kind that doesn't leave evidence. "I'll think about it," she said, which was the same thing as nothing, but gave her time. He left with the confidence of a man who had done this before and found that a day or two of thinking generally moved things in his direction. Lena went inside and opened her ledger and wrote, "Hale, Warren, Pueblo, Oct. 19. Suggested water agreement creates leverage. No specifics. Implied Garnett could be moved. Implication noted." She sent a rider to Garnett before sundown. He arrived the next morning early, before the crew started work, before she had finished her coffee. He tied his horse at the gate and knocked once and came in when she said to. She told him what Hale had said. All of it. She didn't editorialize and she didn't leave anything out. Eli listened with the stillness of someone who has learned that the most important thing you can do when someone is telling you something is to be quiet and actually hear it. When she finished, he said, "Hale's done this in 4 counties. He finds a small operation with something a larger operation needs and tries to make the smaller one believe the larger one is a threat. Then he gets in the middle." "You're not a threat," she said. Not accusatory, a real question. He looked at her across the table. "You signed the agreement. I signed the agreement. The county recorder has it on file. I came out here because this creek matters to my operation, and I don't have any interest in finding a different solution to a problem that's already solved." She thought about the clause he had crossed out before walking in her door. She thought about DeWitt saying, "She'll know what that pashbosher needs." She thought about the well, running clear now, the way it had run in her father's time. There is a kind of trust that doesn't build itself out of sentiment. It builds out of evidence. Lena Pruitt was a person who paid attention to evidence. "I want you there when Hale comes back," she said. Eli nodded. "When?" She checked her ledger. "He said he'd give me time to think. He'll be back in 3 days. He was back in 2. He came mid-morning, the copper roan picking its way up the South Trail like it had business here, which it did not. He pulled up at the fence line and found Lena standing at the east gate with DeWitt to her left and Eli Garnett to her right, and 2 of the fence crew visible at the south post. Not working, just present. Hale took in the arrangement without visible reaction, which told her he was good at this. Better than most. "Miss Pruitt," he said. "Mr. Hale," she said. "I've had time to think." He waited. "My answer is the same as before. This parcel is not for sale, and it is not part of any consolidation. The water agreement is registered and active. If you have further questions about either, you're welcome to speak with the county recorder in Cedar Creek, who has copies of both documents." She paused. And if you come onto this land again without being invited, I'll have the county sheriff meet you at the gate." She said it the way she said most things, without volume, without drama, without anything that could be construed as uncertainty. The cold morning air carried it clearly. Hale looked at Eli. Eli looked back at him with the focused blankness of a man who is comfortable with silence and has nothing to explain. One of Hale's hands shifted in the saddle. The copper roan blew a breath that steamed in the cold air. Hale touched the brim of his hat, turned the roan, rode south. Nobody said anything until the hoofbeats faded past the tree line. DeWitt, who had not moved the entire time, said quietly, "That horse cost more than most men's annual wage." Man who rides a horse like that into working country is trying to make a point. Lena looked at the south trail where the roan had gone. "He made one," she said, "just not the one he intended." She went back inside and drew a line through Hale's entry in the ledger. Word traveled in Harlan County the way it always had, on horseback and through courthouse windows and across the counter of the Cedar Creek grain supply. Within 10 days, 3 neighboring ranchers had ridden to the Pruitt place specifically to ask about the meeting at the gate. A Pueblo land agent leaving empty-handed was not something that happened often, and when it did, people who made their living close to the ground paid attention. The county land recorder, a careful man named Orrin Bassett, who had been registering deeds in Cedar Creek for 22 years, stopped Eli outside his office the following week. "Heard about Hale," Orrin said. Eli said he had. Orrin shook his head slowly. "You know what you did, filing that water agreement publicly with a woman holding a failing fence and a dry well. Every consolidation agent in the territory is going to look at that parcel now and see your name on the paperwork first." "That's the idea," Eli said. Orrin looked at him over the rims of his spectacles. "Most men in your position would have waited. Let the pressure build, bought it at the low point." "Most men would have," Eli said. She wasn't interested in selling at any point. Orrin was quiet. After a moment, "In 22 years, I've registered a lot of water agreements and a lot of deeds. I don't think I've seen a man with your operation come in at fair terms before the price dropped." He said it without ceremony. Just the plain fact of it, stated by a man who had watched long enough to know when something was unusual. Eli rode out to the Pruitt ranch the next afternoon and told Lena what Orrin had said. She was at the east fence, checking the new posts, running her hand along the wire to feel the tension. She listened. Then she said, "He's right. What you did was uncommon." She didn't say it with warmth, and she didn't say it with calculation. She said it the way she said everything, plainly, because it was true. "Thank you," she said, and she used his given name for the first time. He noticed. He didn't make anything of it. November settled in. The creek slowed to its winter pace, and Eli's cattle crossed twice a week as the agreement specified. Lena monitored the crossings, water level, bank condition, the depth of hoof impressions in the soil along the approach. She sent weekly notes to the Garnett ranch. He sent back brief, precise responses that added context she hadn't had, and asked questions that told her he was reading carefully. It was a correspondence of facts that became, without either of them remarking on it, something else. He came in person the second Thursday to check the crossing before the heaviest cattle movement of the season. She was crouching at the bank when he arrived, examining a stretch of compressed earth near the main approach. She said, without looking up, "You need a brush deflector here. Slows the approach, spreads the impact. Bank will hold twice as long." He crouched beside her. She was right. He knew it immediately. The technique was common knowledge among experienced ranchers who worked high-traffic creek crossings, the kind of knowledge that lived in observation rather than in books. They stood. Neither moved away quickly. "These notes you've been sending," he said, "the water level records, the bank compression measurements. In 10 years, whoever works this land is going to know exactly how this creek behaves in every season. That kind of knowledge usually disappears when the person who holds it moves on." She looked at the creek. "My father kept records," she said. "I found them in a trunk after he died. 40 years of water levels and weather and cattle weights. I knew what this land did before I'd lived a full year on it alone. He was quiet for a moment. Then, that's a rare thing. She looked at him. You've been thinking about who works this land in 10 years. Yes, he said. The wind moved through the bare cottonwoods. The cold was the useful kind, clarifying rather than numbing. Miss Pruitt, he said, and the register of his voice shifted slightly, became more deliberate. I'd like to discuss whether the arrangement between us might take a different form, something permanent. She held his gaze. You're talking about more than the water agreement, yes. She did not answer immediately. She never answered anything that deserved consideration with anything less than full consideration. She stood at the creek bank and looked at the water running cold over the stones, the same water her father had drunk from, the same water that ran north now onto Garnett Range, and she turned the question over in her mind the way she turned everything. Slowly, looking at it from the sides and underneath, checking for what wasn't visible from the front. She answered him 5 days later. She rode to the Garnett Ranch on a Tuesday morning, the grass white with the first hard frost of the season. She tied her horse at the gate and walked to where he was working at the equipment shed, repairing a harness with the focused patience of a man who does not consider this work beneath him. He saw her coming and set down the harness and waited. She had conditions, she said. Something in his expression shifted, not surprise, but a particular quality of attention, like a man who has expected this conversation and prepared for it by deciding to accept whatever was offered. The Pruitt land stays registered separately, she said. 380 acres. My name, my title. Not absorbed, not consolidated. Mine. Agreed. I keep the creek records and the East Range management. That doesn't transfer. I'd expect nothing less. She looked at him steadily. And I'm not an addition to your operation. If we build something, I'm part of what's being built. Not an attachment to it. He met her eyes without looking away. I told Dewitt before the fence crew ever set foot on your property. She'll know more about what that land needs than any of us. Listen when she speaks. That's still true. The silence between them held more than the words around it. Then we're agreed, she said. She extended her hand. He shook it the same way she'd seen him shake Orrin Bassett's hand outside the recorder's office. Firm, direct, no performance in it. The handshake of someone who means what they've said and expects the same. Winter came in full and cold. The creek froze edge inward, the way Lena's father had written about. In his 1863 notes, slow gray plates building toward the dark center current that kept moving, even in January. She tracked the freeze pattern and compared it against the records and found they matched within a week's variance. She wrote that in the ledger as evidence of something that could be trusted. Spring arrived with the slow patience it always has in high plains country, testing the ground before it committed, running cold rain ahead of the warmth, keeping the grass low and cautious for longer than you wanted. Then one morning in late March, the garlic pushed through the straw she had banked it with in November. And the mud in the east pasture began to carry weight again, and the creek rose 6 inches overnight from snowmelt off the ridge. Lena was at the east fence checking the new posts, her hand along the wire, feeling the tension the way her father had taught her. When she heard Eli's horse come into the yard, she looked up with the ease of someone who knows who is arriving and finds the sound welcome. He walked to the fence line. Something in the way he moved in that early spring light was unhurried in a way that had nothing to do with having nowhere to go. He had chosen this pace. He looked at the posts. Line held through the freeze, he said. She ran her hand along the top wire and nodded. Good depth on those center posts. Your crew knew what they were doing. DeWitt doesn't know another way. They stood in the early light, the cold still in the air but losing its edge, the grass beginning to green at the base of the stalks where the frost didn't reach overnight. 2 people who had built something the way sound things get built. Not out of desperation, not out of rescue, not out of any arithmetic of advantage, but out of the recognition that some work holds better when 2 people who pay attention to the same things do it together. There is a kind of wealth that announces itself with copperones and silver-chased tack and signed documents, slid caws with the smiles, across tables with a smile that means something else. Most people encounter that kind. Then there is the other kind. It announces itself in fence wire, tensioned correctly in October cold. In a creek bank that holds through the cattle push, because someone crouched at the edge in November and understood what the soil was telling her. In the handwriting of two people in the margin of a contract, adding a clause that protects something worth protecting. Pruitt Garnett Ranch, 380 acres registered in 2 names. The deed was filed in Cedar Creek on a Tuesday in April, and nobody made a ceremony of it, because dearest neither of them was the ceremonial type. The creek still ran cold and clear, the posts held, the garlic came up straight, and in the front page of the new spring ledger, Lena wrote the date, the water level, the temperature, and the condition of the east fence line, the same things her father had written. The things that would tell whoever came next exactly what this land did, and how it behaved, and what it needed. Some knowledge doesn't die if you write it down carefully enough. She closed the ledger, picked up her gloves, went back to work. You've been riding with shadows of the deep West, where the West is told the way it actually was, in the details, in the decisions, in the quiet moments that don't make it into the histories but shape everything that comes after. Leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I read every single one. And subscribe. The next story is already waiting.